research with young people experiencing homelessness. This webinar is hosted by Community-Based Research Canada. My name is Julia Coburn, and I'm the CBRC Program Coordinator. I'll be the moderator for today's session. So Community-Based Research Canada's mission is to address real societal problems through research as a national champion and facilitator for community-based research and campus community engagement in Canada. For 10 years, CBRC has brought together key partners of community campus partnerships. Some CBRC founding members continue to be on the CBRC board today. Our network builds capacity for academia and broader communities to collaborate and use research as a tool to mobilize community participation and action. So we'd love to hear from you throughout this exciting webinar. There's a chat box in the lower right-hand corner where you can type your questions and comments throughout the entire presentation. We will also have a question and answer period at the last 15 minutes of the webinar. So that's when we can address all of your questions and engage in a really fantastic discussion. I'm pleased to introduce our presenters today, Jane Malenfant and Mickey Watchhorn. Jane Malenfant is from Kapuskasing, Ontario. She is a PhD candidate at McGill University's Faculty of Education and a Vanier and Pierre Elliott Trudeau Scholar. Mickey Watchhorn was born in London, Ontario, but now lives in Montreal. He is a researcher from a team from Don La Rue and McGill University and is interested in issues of Indigenous sovereignty, homelessness, and building research communities for social justice. And his favorite animal is the raccoon. So, happy to transition to you, Jane and Mickey.
Hello. Hello. Oh, this is very strange. I guess just let us know if there's any problems with sound or anything. And we're just going to jump right into our presentation today. So yeah, I'm Jane. This is Mickey. And we're going to start out with giving you a bit of context about our work and who we work with and what we're doing here in Montreal. So we are 2 of 6 people who make up YAR, the Youth Action Research Revolution. Naomi, Cheyenne, Laurence, and Maxime aren't here today, although many of them are in the building doing coding right now. And so 5 of the 6 people on our research team do have lived experience of homelessness, but I think we're all bringing different identities and experiences within that to the table. And Dr. Naomi Nichols, who's also from McGill, and I have co-led this project, which is part of my doctoral research. So our research is based out of the organization Dans la Rue here in Montreal, and Naomi and I have been part of conversation with them and now as a whole team since 2017. Looking at how research can inform their practice and vice versa, particularly in how as researchers we can be helping to contribute to the efforts of the organization and not simply kind of perpetuating the same things that researchers have historically done. So we're really focusing on collaboration and kind of learning across different roles within our project. And in terms of where we're actually situated, Mickey, do you want to talk maybe a bit about Dans la Rue and the services that are offered there?
Sure. Well, so first of all, Dans la Rue is an organization that, at least in my own personal opinion, is really not like anything else that we see at the moment on the front lines. So they offer, I would say, very well-balanced, very delicious, very fulfilling meals. They offer a recording studio and other music therapy services. They offer clothes for any occasion, sleeping bags, gear, pillows, blankets, you name it. Dans la Rue can help you with it. They are an invaluable resource. Really, that's, I could rant for hours, but I feel like that's kind of the way I want to put it. They are an invaluable resource.
So, and I think for us, it was important for us to be basing our research, particularly as we were working with young people, in an organization that had those supports that we might not be able to offer as researchers. So there's also psychology services, there's counselors that we're all kind of in conversation with. There's so many, there's a school. I mean, even when I was a young person, POPS was kind of the place that people talked about as the place that really had really solid services. So coming into it, we wanted to make sure we were basing our interviews and our data collection out of somewhere where, if needed, we could access supports that were already really well established. Yeah, let's move to this slide. And so also just a bit of context about the issue that we're working within. Youth homelessness in Canada, between 18 and 20% of the population of people experiencing homelessness are young people. So we're looking at around 35,000 to 40,000 young people who are experiencing homelessness in a given year. I know that there's a new national survey that we actually helped administer here in Montreal that should be coming out this year that might give new numbers on this. These numbers are from 2009, 2015. And so also within that LGBTQ2S youth, youth who are leaving care, Indigenous youth, youth of color, newcomer youth, and youth with mental health or physical health issues are overrepresented but underserved within this population. So that's something we've really been paying attention to in our research. And connecting that with kind of systemic racism and colonialism and xenophobia and ableism and discrimination based on sexuality and gender. As young people are encountering institutions with institutions from the state before, after, and during homelessness. And particularly of interest to me coming from education is that the dropout rate is also significantly higher than the national average. This varies depending on the study, but it's always, at least 8 times higher than housed youth. So that's kind of setting up where we're going at this from. And then our project in particular, we have started kind of as drawing from Naomi Nichols' previous research and my own research and activist work. We've been using really Dorothy Smith's institutional ethnography as well as some anarchist theory and practice, which is something that I was bringing in, but I think has really resonated with our team. Do you want to talk a bit maybe about that at all? Do you have any?
Well, I know that actually it's part of what got me interested in this project is since my teens, I tried to involve myself like very heavily, in as many different activist spaces and projects as I could. And so I know I'm coming to this a lot like with my own basis in theory, but I find that really the whole team has been kind of on the same page throughout, like whether it's from an academic or personal perspective. It's actually something I very much enjoyed.
That's good.
About the project.
And one of the things I think drawing from that is that we always aim to kind of not study people, following kind of Dorothy Smith's approach, is that we're trying to work with people to study systems. So pulling together kind of through people's experiences, and we've been using an institutional history kind of approach, looking at, so what have your experiences been over time in state institutions, and how can we better understand that together? So we were drawing from some work coming out of Carleton, and kind of Charlotte Smith has this idea of points of failure and points of possibility. So what are the places in schools, in legal and criminal justice, in mental health and healthcare, child welfare? What are places where points of failure are happening? And also where are some points of possibility that we might be able to look to? So following this, we also want to do research that makes a difference. So we're not kind of pushing forward a research agenda that has a particular goal in mind, but that we're building this together. We've been really trying to focus on making every aspect of our work participatory. Can you talk maybe a bit about how we developed the interview structure together?
Of course. We, as I remember it happening, we all kind of sat as a team and discussed first the things that we liked and disliked when it came to talking to institutions and doing other things like this. I know that a lot of me and the team talked about that we didn't want to feel how it often feels, say for example, when you're signing into a shelter or something, they'll often ask you for a quick, call it institutional history on where have you been in life, how did you get here? And we really didn't want it to not feel like talking to another institution. We really wanted our I almost said our reviews, our interviews to be more as I said, participatory and more of a peer track. So when I do an interview with a youth, I'm not there as a researcher, I'm there as another youth. Mm-hmm. We kind of talked a lot about how often youth in the streets will talk amongst themselves about the problems that we're facing, and we kind of wanted to try and capture that a little bit because in our experience, these kinds of conversations far more comes out because there's a higher level of comfort. It's easier for me to talk about my experiences with someone I know is going to get it, because I don't feel like I have to explain what I would see as some basic things. I know they're already understood, and we felt that was going to be very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've really tried to, when we do an interview, it's always kind of, as much as possible, we have myself or Naomi and one of the youth researchers. And now I think sometimes you guys just by yourselves. And I think that we've tried to kind of push away that idea that we are coming in as very objective observers of a phenomena, but that there are things that we know, there are things that the interviewee knows that we're kind of constructing together about what homelessness might look like. So I want to talk a bit about the timeline of what we've done throughout the project, because I think it's also important. One of the big things that I like to emphasize is taking time to work in community-based research, that time is like such an important thing. We've definitely taken so much time in this project to ensure that we're paying attention to how we're working together. And so Mickey's going to share kind of an overview that he's written up in order to actually share back to some of the staff. But I put phase 0.5 as kind of a year before the youth team was hired, where we had discussions with folks at Dans la Rue, kind of making sure that we were on the same page, but also that the youth researchers would have supports. Originally, there was supposed to be one, but there are four. We interviewed 9 people, and I almost wanted to hire 9 youth researchers, but because everyone's bringing in such a unique perspective. But so we have 4 youth researchers who have come in and out, making sure that they financially were going to be fairly compensated, that we had that all figured out before, reliably kind of getting paid, that the organization wasn't going to be covering costs in terms of finances or personnel, that we were really ensuring that we were contributing to the organization rather than taking resources from them. So that was kind of the setup. And then you want to talk about from kind of when you were hired onwards?
Sure. So we started October 14th, I believe, was to the day, was our first meeting here at McGill, actually. It was, it's a day fondly remembered. And from there until about December 2018, I would call it our setup phase. We got to know each other. Us, the youth, got I guess we call it almost some training from Jane and Doug Nichols on research practices, ethics, basically making sure that we had a toolkit that was ready for the work that we wanted to do. It was a very arduous process, but honestly, like looking back, I enjoy it and feel it was very, very important and has really prepared us for a lot of things like that happened since then. Mm-hmm. Starting in January 2019, we started moving forward with some more, call it advanced training. We started attending some different talks. We actually held a few small talks of our own, mm-hmm. Both with other peer researchers and just people in the field. We got a lot of positive feedback about the stuff that we were doing, a lot of encouragement, I found. Mm-hmm. From there, ending in March 2019 and into April, we got we got the green light from McGill and started our interviews, and we really we jumped feet first into it from basically the week that we got confirmation. I think that next week we started doing interviews.
This is the ethics confirmation.
Yes.
Yes. No.
So as I said, from there, feet first, we completed 39 interviews, I believe it was, by July 2019. That would be 17 in English and 22 in French. And we were very proud of that figure, actually. That's quite a lot. And these were, I think all of those were completed interviews. We had done all 3 stages.
Yeah. So one thing we didn't mention was that one of the things we decided as a group, because of the things Mickey talked about of kind of youth who've experienced homelessness are so often asked to share. We wanted to do 3 interviews if people were willing. So because we were focusing on different systems, maybe the first one could be education, the second would be child welfare, just to really be able to build a relationship across the interviews and also just stop stop it from being like, okay, here's an hour, tell me everything about your life. So many of the youth, not everyone, but many have opted to do 3 interviews because they've had so much institutional involvement.
I believe I did 2 myself.
I think you did. Oh, you didn't do your 3rd one.
No, I haven't done my 3rd one yet. That'll be the talking about cops. Actually, an important thing to break down, we've often like broken our interviews down into like, well, as you kind of mentioned, like specific topics. So like today we're going to be like spending an hour talking about your experiences in school, or your experiences in the shelter system, or just your experiences with police. And I've been finding that like going back and like reading through that, it makes it a lot easier to process all that. So I would say that our system seems to work pretty well. So moving on from there into what we're calling, well, next steps, or phase 4. We're currently working on a code book to go through all of these interviews. I like that we've done, so we can start really breaking down what do we have data-wise, like what kind of patterns are we looking at, and
yeah, we are still doing interviews as well. But I think we're going to be stopping. We have about 50 right now, and we do work. Our team is very bilingual, so we're working in English and French. Some members of the team don't speak English. Some members of the team speak pretty good French, but not great. So that's something we've been really intentional with. In terms of interviews that we will be looking to do, there are 2 groups that kind of Mickey and another one of the youth researchers after doing interviews has kind of flagged as people that we're not reaching. And that was youth who aren't accessing shelters. So we're hoping to do some street interviews before it gets really cold out. And also Indigenous youth who are often not using the services that we're based out of, or have not been interviewed so far, but that's something we intentionally want to focus on and would like to do some more interviews with. One of the things that I think I thought was most exciting about this was during our first phase, we were able, there are some legal students who do some kind of internship things at Dans la Rue. And one of the things that they were able to do was kind of work with us so that as a group, while we were getting to know each other, one of the things we were doing was saying, okay, so, you know, if I have the cops called on me because I'm being informed or whatever, what is the actual policy and law that's being enacted in that? And so the legal would come work with us about once a month, and we'd be able to have these really incredible conversations where they were saying, well, these are your rights, and this is the law, and this is what the police can and can't do. And often what we were saying, sorry, I'm just seeing questions now. Yeah, we'll answer that. But so what was actually happening a lot of the time was that the youth researchers were saying, well, this might be what the law is, and this might be what our rights are, but this is not what's happening on the ground. This is not what's actually happening when we interact with people in the healthcare system, or this is not what's happening when we're interacting with police. And in this new phase, we're going to be going back to working again with legal students to kind of flesh out book that we've been trying to put together of different laws and what rights people have, and where we're seeing that those are like very often not being followed through in ways that they seem to be on paper. So this is our next slide. We want to specifically dive into some things that we, as people who have experienced housing precarity and are working in research, want to highlight as kind of ethical approaches to doing this kind of work. I originally had sent this very long title for the webinar called By Us or For Us, Ethical and Meaningful Community-Based Research with and as Young People with Lived Experience of Homelessness.
That's a mouthful.
So I think this is something that's been really front of mind for me, working in this project, kind of occupying different roles. For me, many of my peers are still experiencing housing precarity and homelessness, even if I'm not. And something in our team, this is something that we're navigating. You know, people have to find new housing, people want to find more stable housing or negotiate housing or find safe housing. So this is something that is far away from our research. And maybe one of the things that we really want to talk about is questioning like what expertise is, and maybe you can talk about that.
We've had some really awesome conversations amongst like the group about what that can mean, and I had a good point here, but I'll just freeball it. I know. So trusting people's expertise. I I encounter in a lot of activist spaces outside of this, that there's been this this idea found that well, you know, I have a degree, I've studied this subject in a book really hard, I really know what it's like, and it's something I've always vehemently disagreed with. I feel that topics like this, the experts are the people who've lived it. So I may not have a high school education, but I could definitely tell you what it's like to sit on a street corner all day waiting to have enough resources to eat and to get through the next day, to then have to do it again. And I think that that kind of experience in conversations about subjects like these is not only like really important, but I would argue at least as valid as that secondary degree. And I think that any conversations that we're going to be having about social issues need to be founded in that first-hand experience more so than academic one, because I find there's a great divide between what a book says what life can say, is how I would put it.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. I think that is something, particularly because we also, one of the things we started with was kind of sitting down and looking at how people were defining homelessness. And so we looked at definitions from the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, as well as definitions people were using in different research, and seeing what resonated with us, because while we all have different experiences of what not having a home can look like, there are some things kind of common across that we could say, we know this. How do we know this? And how does it fit in with what people are saying within research that may or may not be grounded in lived experience? And I think one of the things we really work at in this project is trying to see those as not kind of two separate things, that we can be researchers who know things through research, but also that doesn't discount our experiences in our lives. And that we can use both of those things to kind of impact changes for social justice. So I have a slide up right now of some of the things that we kind of saw as the most important things we wanted to be talking about when, when you're working with people who are young, people who might have experienced homelessness, but also I think this would go for many different people as well. Here are some things that we want to just really
get out there.
Yeah, one of the things also that I think we discussed when we had these like lived experience days with other researchers, when we were talking about like frustrations, and you brought it up when we were prepping for this, was like the idea of kind of meaningful engagement and like what it means to hear a story and say, oh, wow, you're so inspirational, or hear a story and say like, what can I do to help?
Yeah,
you don't have to punch anything.
No, but exactly that. I can see something that's torn me down a lot in other spaces is I'll talk about like my experiences, and I hear like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I know I've heard it put in stronger words, like by people, but I'll put it as quite simply, I'm not sharing these stories for pity, and I would really like to say that I don't think anyone else is either, especially in conversations like these. It's not a pity party. It's you said, it's not about telling, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I want you to instead say, okay, what can I do to make sure that doesn't happen to someone else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Something that when we're thinking about kind of tokenistic involvement and engagement and inviting people to come in and share these very personal things, for me, while the structure itself, the structures of power stay the same, while we're not actually shifting those at all, that I think that any kind of meaningful engagement is kind of impossible, because it can work up until a point, and then those structures are still the same. Mm-hmm. So, you can trust someone's expertise or lived experience until the point where it starts disagreeing with other forms of expertise. And I think that's something we're trying to push it back against. I've also included some pretty obvious maybe things like paying people in a reliable and prompt way. This is something that I have funding now. But before this, even it was always expected that I had money in the bank, that I wasn't struggling to pay rent. I think so many times when you're trying to include people who have lived experience, and I know some organizations who do this really well, making sure that you're not assuming that they have money to even pay rent, let alone pay for things out of pocket or wait months for payment.
Yeah, classism does seem to be kind of an issue even in work like this, and I find that a little disconcerting.
Yeah.
Other things that we talked about was mentorship and network of peers. It's something I found especially invaluable in this project. Me, myself, I can only do so much. The other people on the team here can only do so much. We have a lot that we can do, but I know that both like Dr. Nichols and Jane have both been trying very hard to build networks around us so that we can work with other people. Like I'll be working with, I forget his name, but Alex.
Yes, Alex Meglas.
Yeah. He through watching me and the team do talks invited me and I think Laurence are both doing mediating like conversations outside of the project, and I think that's something that could be very powerful in this kind of work, is giving people like us a better platform to speak on. Like, it's one thing for us to talk to you guys about our experiences and what we think, but I would argue it's just as valuable, if not more, to be able to get us out there to talk to other people who maybe aren't even thinking about stuff like this, but might once they hear us talk.
Absolutely. I think we've been trying really hard to do that. And also, even for me, I mean, this kind of idea of mentorship and like institutional know-how that is so difficult to enter when you're not coming from this world. I mean, I think that for many schools, post-secondary included, homeless kid is not the like student that people are anticipating. So I think coming in and knowing people who have been there and who have done this, who know, can really be great, because you don't feel like, you know, as much of an outsider. You can see, okay, well, this person did this, and for me, just like seeing other grad students, seeing other academics who openly talk about their experiences makes me feel like really good. And you can create these networks so that you can support people. And I think maybe we'll wrap up soon and we can get to these questions, but solidarity is something for me that I think is really something that pushes past these kinds of integration that is really well intentioned and, you know, that we're always trying to do into these systems. But I think solidarity to try to change the way that these systems work, to know that something I see a lot in academia, like people are precarious here too. And so how is that precarity organized in similar ways that are experienced in different ways, but we can be thinking of these as systems that we can start building these networks of solidarity across.
Very well said.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I could add anything to that. I think cool. Do you want to open it up to some questions?
Yeah, there's only one more thing that I forgot to say, but I think explain the process or explaining why or why not something is happening has been my number one piece of advice for anyone working with people with lived experience, with young people, because so often I think that there's like a participant element over here, but then with all of the grants and there's so many things that we're like, okay, well, this is something we can go back into the university and do in our offices, but I send an obscene amount of emails, I think, and I try to involve all of us in all of the decision making and all of the processes. If we can't do something, I'm really clear about why not. And I try to be, at least, and I think that that's something that is so important, because if you're not explaining things, you're still just, you know, keeping that power in the same places. But yes.
Yeah, we're not about hierarchical power structures here. It's probably for the best.
Yeah, we try our best. We're also constantly imperfect, so. Well,
as is everyone else.
Yeah.
But I can say, like, from a personal perspective, that kind of involvement is something I don't see a lot in those places or hear about a lot. Mm. And I'd say it's actually probably the most important thing about working with people like with lived experience, especially ones who maybe aren't coming from an academic area. Like, I know that you guys are constantly trying to not use the haughty intellectual language, like, you guys like break it down for us, because, you know, like, for example, me, I'm smart, but I'm a high school dropout. I might not understand everything at the same level that you guys do, but you guys definitely make it a point to try and make sure that I do, because it's important that I understand.
Yeah.
And I think that goes for the whole team.
I hope so. I agree. I see that there's some cool questions.
There's some very cool questions.
I think that we're done, and we would love to chat more. I said there's a couple of questions that are really, really important. So what is it? So there's, are we cool to just start answering questions? I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah. How did you support the youth researchers to let go of the stories of trauma they heard, to let them go and not hold them?
Well, that was actually part of our setup process. So we, as a team, sat down and asked that same questions because, like I know that just to kind of like move forward, sometimes in interviews, topics will come up that hit very close to home, and I know that, it can be stressful, can be a little distressing even, but our protocol is we have a check-in right after the interview. So say I was interviewing with Jane afterwards, our youth leaves, as long as they're okay, we part of our
I see a tiny person in the box. Do we need to do anything, Julia? Okay.
So part of our protocol was first make sure youth that we've interviewed are okay, because often youth talking about these traumatic events, even if they are in the past, can kind of bring them back up in your head, but we don't want to leave anybody in distress. So we first clear that the youth that we've just interviewed is okay. From there, we have called a debrief session where, so if it were me and Jane, we would just have a quick talk. Hey, how is that for you? Is that for you? Is there, are you okay? And then from there, we usually just have like a text or email check-in just to confirm again, hey, things are still okay.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. This has been something we've really been intentional with. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, this is this has been such an amazing webinar, and lots of questions are starting to come in, and sorry for that little bit of technical glitch, and now we're back on, but honestly, we so appreciate you sharing your story, and we have some more questions that I'm going to start asking you from the audience here. And I hope that I didn't miss this first one, but we have one from Betty, who was asking, how do you support the youth researchers to let go of the stories that they're hearing so that they're not holding on to them or feeling that emotional burden of all these stories?
Yeah, I think that's what Mickey was just speaking to.
Yeah.
And I think it's something really, really important.
Definitely. I know that there have been a few times, without bringing up specifics, where an interview actually was really hard for me, but then just being able to just reach out and hey, how's everything going, and just a quick conversation that maybe isn't directly on the fact of, hey, I'm reliving this bit of trauma in my head, but even just I'm connecting with someone that I know. I could say that I find personally is often just helpful enough, but we definitely have a network of support here on this team to make sure that if that does come up, it can and will be dealt with. Yeah.
And I think that this might speak a bit to one of the other questions. But it's something, when we think of actions out of this project, one of the things we think of is kind of as an everyday action. We are supporting one another in ways that kind of go beyond what the research demands of us. So, we're very adaptive as well. When we started doing interviews, we had stopped meeting every week. And then when we found that, things were kind of hard for everyone, we started having weekly meetings again, because that allowed us to, often we'll take the morning to just kind of check in and go through stuff and say oh, how was that interview, or how was this? Or, also being, coming from places that we also have things going on in our lives that are often, sometimes connected to the interviews, or, kind of similar things, not in the past, but I think in the present as well. We've lost people, these are ongoing things. So I think that it's something we really try to have kind of within our team as some support systems.
That's really interesting that you're also having a really adaptable research process, and just your whole process has been so interesting and so different than the typical research process, but exactly the kind of work that we love to see happening. We have some more fantastic questions that have come in. One was about, how does this research help youth, and what are some concrete actions that have happened as a result or in the process?
Mm-hmm.
I actually think that's a really awesome question. How does it help youth? I think I would almost say that there's too many ways to directly list, but that may just be a personal amount of hopefulness. I can safely say giving youth a voice that isn't just assumed to be theirs would be the most important one. I find often it's very easy for, I'll use the terminology, adults to speak up on behalf of you because they've been there and they know what's best. But I find that unless that adult has also been there, I would critique them by saying, well, what do you really know? Like where, like, question their authority, question their like position of power. And I think giving youth on the streets the ability to do that systemically is something that I don't think I've ever seen before, but I really feel is something we need to see more of.
I agree. I think the way that we've been thinking of kind of helping youth has been, we're trying to get away from kind of the idea of like, here we're doing research and then we're going to do action at the end. Because we kind of think of this as an ongoing, unfolding action in itself. So I know even like connections have been made throughout the team where people are each other's, like, people can rely on each other in really common ways, if something is going on in their life, or, but also that connections are being made with young people. I would say also one of the things I've been really intentional with, if I'm invited to go talk somewhere, I always try to bring the team, or at least part of the team, because I think that offers the people in the audience a really different perspective. So, we've talked in schools, talking to future educators about what homelessness looks like so that they can see, maybe warning signs, their students, like just bringing this to places that aren't homelessness specific, and talking about this from our particular perspectives as well as from a research perspective. I think it's opened up kind of, I don't know, I guess long-term kind of plans for how we could be integrating this research in different spheres, but also I would say, like, at least for the youth in our team, concretely making changes, in how, I don't know.
Even just like, if I may speak of it, like personally, just the quality of, like, since I got employed, like with you guys, my quality of life has changed. I'm so enslaved to like whatever bit of work I can like pick up. I know that there's going to be some consistency and some stability in my life that wasn't there before, and I think just being able to offer that to a small group of youth is a big change.
That's really interesting just to hear about the process itself being a lot of the change in how, and it's a good point that it's not something that it's such a long journey and it takes time, but how all of these things that are unfolding that throughout, with the researchers connecting with each other and having the support network with, going to the sources. I love what you were mentioning earlier. There were something about, you had so many different things that you were mentioning, but the points of failure and points of possibility. So I think, going to schools, would be that source of a point of possibility, and using that and thinking about that throughout your research. We have lots more questions, so they keep coming in. You're doing such fascinating work, so I can see a lot of interest here. One question from Aaron was, by university's ethics board wouldn't allow peers to sit on interviews. Can you explain a bit about the process of getting ethics approval for this? And similarly, can you provide any details on how you paid peer research, if that's okay to talk about that?
Whoa. Oh, that's weird. I mean, that didn't really come up in our ethics approval, but I'm not really sure why. So the youth researchers are hired on as employees of Dans la Rue. I'm not sure why we didn't have a hard time. There was like a lot of consideration about kind of the risks that would be present. I'm actually interested to why they would be allowed to sit in on interviews, because that was also like a really there's no sound. I don't think I can type that fast. Can everyone else hear me?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I am not sure. That was like a huge part of our project, was particularly that the youth peer researchers would be researchers in every interview. So, and we pay them through, actually I can answer two questions. So this project is funded by SHIRK. We actually just got a new one of the grants to continue. But and also I hold a Vanier Scholarship and the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation Doctoral Scholarship. So between those three pools of funding, we've paid youth researchers. I pay also for transit passes every month so that you can get to work, you know, those kinds of things. Yeah, so we pay them. Yeah, well, and we have part of the work of setting this up was particularly looking at Dans la Rue as an organization and how we could partner with them to ensure that the youth were getting paid. Although we did have to think about welfare as something for some of the youth researchers, that we didn't want to be paying too much so that it would eat into their welfare. Are we going
I also want to mention, thank you so much for that answer. So to any of the people participating, if we'll try to answer as many of your questions in this hour. If we don't get to you, feel free to email us. I'll have our email at the end. And if you're open to it, Jane and Mickey will maybe allow for that to continue, because I imagine maybe there's some other follow-up around that particular
emails. Yeah, Erin, I'd love to talk more about that. That's weird.
Yeah. So there's certainly more questions coming in. One is from Betty about how did you support the youth researcher? Oh, I've got that one. But there was another one that she was asked was, what is the plan to report back to people who share their stories, and you know, to make them know that what they're telling you is actually making a difference?
So one of the things is I also want to emphasize, and I think actually having youth researchers has been part of this. So while there are a lot of really difficult stories, there are also, I think, a lot of stories of, you know, success and kind of like community and activism and all of these things. So that I think it's been really important to recognize that while we are talking about really difficult stuff in a lot of these interviews, that these are also stories, I won't say stories of resilience because I don't like that word, but like that we are also like having conversations about really amazing work that's happening, you know, creating collectives and communities. So I think that has also been really important. And this is a huge question. We have not started sharing back quite yet with participants, but
how are we going to? I know that we've talked about a bunch of different things. We've talked about the possibility of like releasing, like we called it, like a urban jungle survival guide.
Yeah.
That would involve like youth being able to directly contribute to it, like however many issues of it like that we did. And just kind of on a side note, we talk about it as stories of trauma. I believe her name is Vicki Reynolds.
Oh yeah.
I like how she put it because it's how I try and view my stories. Is it's not stories of trauma or resilience. It's stories of resistance. There was an obstacle in my life or a force working against me, and I pushed back. And I found in talking to others that they also really like that framing. So I guess that's kind of how we're trying to approach this.
Yeah. I think in sharing back, it's going to be something that also unfolds as we go. Like most everything in this project, we've talked about, doing zines or kind of like guides for youth across Canada, because we talk about youth in Montreal, but so many youth are traveling around. But also, you know, we want to make a zine for the Dans la Rue staff as well, kind of with what we're finding there. And I would love to be able to make something that youth could contribute to if they wanted to. So basing it out of our findings and the stories that we're hearing, but also that it's something that's living and can continue to be adapted and added to and incorporate.
And I think that's the only action worth taking, is how I put it. There's no such thing as one concrete solution. It needs to be something that's adaptable and ever-changing and constantly being reinformed.
Yeah. And continue bringing it to spaces that sharing back to the young people who have shared with us, but also bringing it into spaces that they might not be thinking of this kind of thing has been really important in how we're thinking of like mobilizing this research.
No, thank you so much. This is so fantastic. There's another question about how do you perceive this kind of work going beyond the funding? I mean, it seems like this could just become a whole movement. There's, all of the outcomes that could come out of your work, and yeah, maybe any ideas, or maybe there's still need more time to think about it.
Yes. I mean, one of the things, I think I'm in a really unique position in that I do have 2 pretty big doctoral scholarships. I don't think I could be doing the work that I'm doing otherwise if I was still having to work like 6 jobs at the same time. I think funding is really important, and we'll continue, I think, to be seeking out funding in different ways to continue the work. There's a question of what does this work look like if we didn't have funding, or maybe I was finished my PhD and whatever, and will we be continuing this? Yes, I think that there's some tangible things like paying everyone, or like, we're all going to Edmonton in November to present at a conference, and these kinds of things that are really, to contribute to research stuff. There's money needed, but I think that this is something we're kind of taking a multi-pronged approach at. So regardless of whether we had funding or not, I think I would still be doing this work, and I think the whole team would still be doing this work. So I think it might look different, but we're absolutely, this is something that's really implicated in our lives too. So I don't think we are going to stop anytime soon.
Well, I mean, and even if, I know for me, if this project stopped existing, I would really want to find a way to continue doing the work, even if it was just speaking on my own. I think that this is something that isn't going to get better until there's push for it. Funding or not, I would really hope this project, at least in some form, would continue.
Yeah, I mean, and hopefully more comes, because it's true, the amount of time you've been able to dedicate to this, your entire team, is you can see the outcomes that are coming from that, and it's really incredible. We've got another question from Joanna. What are the spaces that you meet in, and who are others beyond youth that maybe you bring into this project?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
The spaces? Sure. So as mentioned, we mostly work in dans la rue for the moment, although we've been looking to a few others, like demographic-specific spaces. I know we were talking about maybe reaching out to the Native Friendship Center. We wanted to reach out to another organization, Catch Cafe, here in Montreal. I believe we also have some, call it sister projects, reaching out to places, but I guess they aren't quite so much involved with us in our work directly. Mostly dans la rue, and just here at McGill we'll meet, or just in a cafe. We're very mobile.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of comes from lots of us having like the life experience that we do, is we try and remain pretty flexible.
Yeah, we've been very flexible. One of the things that we also had to keep in mind when we first imagined this, we're like, okay, we'll meet at McGill. We have space here. We'll do interviews here. Not, many people don't want to McGill. It's up on the mountain. It's like weird and institutional. So, and also some people don't want to come to Pops either. So we try to give people a lot of options for doing interviews. As far as meeting, we try to just, being at the day center is nice because there's lunch. But if we're at McGill, like today, we ordered pizza, that we're just ensuring that people are not getting kind of, that they're not having to scramble to find food, or that it's not upsetting their day-to-day things.
Accommodating.
Yeah.
I think that's really also speaks to having people that have the lived experience to think of all those things, that maybe somebody that hasn't experienced it won't be necessarily front and center on their mind, but when you think about it for a little bit, it seems really obvious. But having a space that doesn't feel intimidating and is hard to get to and all those things is really important. We have some other great questions, and maybe we'll have another few minutes and then I'll just wrap up. But I'm sure this will continue to keep coming, and I'm sure people will have more questions once we're done. Joanna asked another question about what type of vision do you have, and to what end are you working together towards? Mm-hmm. So what is the big vision?
Revolution. Yeah. Not in maybe the red flags and Molotovs sense, but definitely at least in for some, not just the motion of maybe change. I would like to think personally that we like have this vision of making a change, whatever that is.
Yeah, I agree.
If you'd like to elaborate on what the change might be, I know this is your work.
I mean, it's all of our work. I think that there is something, because we do talk about, anarchy a lot. But I think doing this work and having so many conversations with young people and seeing again and again and again kind of the discrimination that occurs in institutions, the violence that occurs, these kinds of stories are just like, they're not new to me, they're not new to you, but I think it's really hard to hear these stories again and again and again and kind of have faith in the system as it exists. And so work that is making it slightly better for some is, I guess, worthwhile, but only if it's part of a kind of ultimate plan to try to, make society actually shift so that these people who are being most marginalized are not, that this isn't continuing. So I think in our work, while we want to think about policies and all of these things, ultimately we see that there's something wrong with the system for things to keep happening this way.
Or maybe not even just that there's something wrong, but that there's some kind of block. And I think it comes back to how often do you really even think about these things, even as a researcher without the lived experience. There's things that you can get at and hope to not change and hope that makes a difference. But I think the vision would just be more projects like this, because I feel like I've kind of trailed off under all this.
That's okay. Revolution.
Yeah, let's do it. I wonder, just based on everything you're talking about, what are some ways do you think, people could continue to support work like yours in other areas of the country, or and so on? How could this work continue to be supported?
Like I said, more projects like this. I would encourage anybody doing research in a similar vein to, even just if you're looking for a assistant, just look for someone with an lived experience. If you're trying to write a piece on policy, maybe go and ask someone who's been on the streets. I find people in their privilege often make assumptions. And I think that could be the most damaging thing to that, is kind of assumptions that we often make about what it means to be housed precariously or homeless. And so that would be my first thing, Jane.
Yeah, I would say also just always being open to learning, which can be hard when you're trying to kind of take a stance on something to say, this is what we must be doing, which I think we also do. But that is, in tandem with being but I don't know everything, and this is something that's constantly shifting, and we need to always be learning from each other. But one thing that I think very strongly about is kind of change every day. So that every day, the things that we're doing, we're not saying, okay, once I get tenure, I'm going to be a champion for, homeless youth, or once I do this or do that, that every day and every piece of project that we're doing is an opportunity to be embodying the activism that we want to bring into our work, and that's not always possible, but that at least we're trying in every space with every opportunity to be recognizing the need for change.
Yeah, I think that's there's some really interesting kind of fundamental things about just the fact that shifting the power of who's involved and whose voice is being heard, and the process from beginning to end. And it's so incredibly important. And, just to hear that, how that was one of the biggest outcomes even was really interesting. So I'm going to have one last question, and we'll unfortunately have to wrap this up. But my goodness, it's so fascinating. Joanna asked, what expectations do youth have from this project, and do you need to clarify the expectations with youth at any time?
I think that expectations have been something that we've paid a really close eye to. I don't think that's but because one of the things, I've gone into an interview, I think we did an interview together where someone was like, I need welfare. Can you get me welfare? And I was like, no. Which is really hard to kind of sit there. But we try to make that clear on the outset that this is a project trying to look at systems to see what might be changed for the better, how we can think about prevention of youth homelessness in different ways, looking at how people's trajectories into homelessness or in and out of homelessness have happened. I think with our youth team, the expectations are things that we can kind of negotiate a bit more and discuss on an ongoing basis. It's a bit harder with youth who are just coming in for a couple of interviews, but we try at the outset to say, this is our project. This is our kind of collective idea of what this looks like. Here are some things that we can't do. We can't connect you to, we could connect you to a housing worker. Like we can refer you, not in an actual referral, but we can tell you, maybe what services POPs offers or something. But I think it's something that we have to keep in mind because often if we don't make clear what we're coming in to do and also the things that we can and can't do, we can't say that we're going to change policy based on this project. We can't say that this project is going to get more housing for youth. So I think it's tricky because this is also something, as I've said, that's unfolding and changing. So, I think that's a really good question. And I think it's something that we maybe don't always do as best as we could, but.
Yeah. I know something, just if I may, if it helps to answer the question, I know I've had a lot of youth that I have a personal relationship with who've come in and given their stories, have told me that the one thing they hope the most is just that something changes, whether that's in how POPs operates or whether that's how DPJ, CAS operates or how the government operates. It doesn't matter. There just needs to be change. And I think that's something I hear echoed a lot. And so I guess that's what I would say the expectation is, and the expectation I think that we're going to be able to make is something changes.
Well, and ideally, I think that this is one of many really rad research projects that's happening around youth homelessness in Canada and elsewhere right now. So that's been part of our work is trying to connect to other researchers who are doing this, whether they're peer researchers or not. We went to Sweden last month. Not you, but maybe next.
I got a magnet.
But we're trying to connect with other people doing really cool research that might be able to do things with their projects that we can't do, that, maybe we can do some things that they can't do. So I think collaborating to try to achieve some of those expectations that we have for ourselves and that youth might have for us.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think we'll wrap it up here, but we can't thank you enough, Jane and Mickey, for sharing all about your work. It's been incredibly insightful, and I could just speak for everybody. I've been seeing some fantastic comments in the chat box about how down to earth and engaging this webinar has been. And so hopefully this is just a beginning. We'll continue this conversation and as a community continue to push forward this really important type of work. So just to let the audience know, this webinar has been recorded, so you can continue to watch it again or look back at it at a later time. So it'll be on the CBRC website under our resources section. So you can get involved in more ways. We welcome you to become a CBRC member as an institution, organization, individual, or student. You can continue to join CBRC webinars just like this that we'll have on a regular basis on many different topics. Please feel free to send news and events from your organization to CBRC so we can share it with our members in our community. So you can send that to info@communityresearchcanada.ca. Also, please sign up to our CBRC mailing list to join our newsletter, and you can continue to hear more about events and initiatives coming up. And lastly, please consider joining the CTU Expo, which is coming up in May 2020 in Sault Ste. Marie. We'll have a network of CBR researchers from across Canada and also internationally coming together that week, and it'll be an extremely engaging, insightful event. We welcome you to become a CBRC member, as I said earlier. So lastly, we have a feedback form. It'll just take 2 minutes after this webinar. It'll just pop right up. So we welcome your feedback about this webinar and also about other webinars that you happen to be interested in, and look forward to your feedback. So thank you so much again to our wonderful presenters and for all of you for participating. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.